What's going on, everybody? Cryo here, and we're back with another Mythic Plus pull-by-pull dungeon walkthrough. Today we're going to be taking a look at the dreaded Tol Dagor, the most unanimously hated dungeon in all of BFA in regards to Mythic Plus, but for good reason. From the wonky camera angles to the tight corridors, the dungeon's extreme sensitivity to almost every affix, all of this together makes it extremely difficult to time this while in a pug, but that's why we're here. Let's take a look and see what we can do as the tank or party lead to alleviate some of these pressures from our group and allow us to time our plus 15s much easier. Remember to leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and ring that bell to be notified when the next Mythic Plus pull-by-pull dungeon gets dropped. Let's get into it. Here we go with this good old Tol Dagor, pull by pull. These first few pulls provide an excellent opportunity to see what your group is capable of. As long as it's not a bolstering week, you can pull as large as you can handle, provided that the group uses their stuns and slows, knockbacks, and other crowd controlling abilities to their maximum benefit. If the group is a full-on pug, I recommend taking it slow-ish. You still want to time the key. As the tank, you want to be mindful of the sewer vice jaws. These apply a stacking debuff called Massive Chomp, and this reduces your maximum health by 5% for 12 seconds. While fighting one, it's not too bad, but while fighting multiple, it's easy to lose track of your HP and flop over. The silk crabs are more annoying than dangerous unless you decide to do a large pull. They will randomly select a player within 10 yards and cast Squeeze. This ability will root said player, dealing ticking damage for 6 seconds. You can be selected by more than one crab at a time, so mind your distance and utilize good kiting skills and stuns. As you can see here, while fighting just 2 alligators, the Massive Chomp debuff jumps up to 4 very quickly, so I immediately turn tail and run. Now we didn't do it here, but I recommend pulling the stinging insects before pulling the boss, or else they will engage with you, and this could be annoying on certain affixes. Now the Sand Queen is a remarkably simple fight, although a long one during tyrannical weeks. The main focus of this fight is the correct placement of sand traps. Since they spawn near players, it would behoove your group to stay semi-stacked and move the boss around in a circular pattern to ensure that the playing area remains clear. This also makes the tank's job of grabbing aggro on the drones much easier. During upheaval, make sure to spread out. You do not want multiple people taking unnecessary damage. There are several classes that can avoid the upheaval damage entirely if it should be cast on them, however this requires significantly more awareness and planning. Be careful not to kite too far, as this boss will reset. Once the boss is defeated, engage the Stinging Swarm at the entrance of the drain. If you have a blacksmith or a rogue, this is an excellent time to move ahead and unlock the drain gate to make kiting the awakened mob much easier and faster. After I unlock this gate, we will be pulling the awakened mob all the way to the brig. So let's bring up the route. This route will work well with most weeks and only requires a tiny bit of tweaking during teaming. We've already cleared the outside portion of the dungeon and have just begun the process of maneuvering inside. If your party does have the ability to open the drain gate, continue moving straight forward up through the floor and then down towards the hall to the brig staircase. If your group does not have access to a lockpicker, you will need to kite the awakened mob to the left and work your way through the drain until you also reach the brig staircase. The brig is pretty straightforward as there are only 2 pulls to be made. This is also the location where your party can receive buffs to help your Tol Dagor endeavors. The detention block also has prison cells that party members may open. You may opt into doing so on certain weeks such as teaming to grab a little bit more percent. The office quarters is littered with dangerous mobs, but are spread out enough allowing your group to pull safely. This is where we will find our 3rd awakened mob. Unlock the gate if you can and follow the red arrow. If not, you guessed it, the long way around it is. I tend to drop the 3rd obelisk just before the 2nd cannon location. This allows me to skip some tricky pulls that, yes, easy if done correctly, but can go very wrong with a pug. The cannons are a great tool. If used poorly though, can cause a lot of grief, aggravation, and unnecessary wipes. Note that we do not touch the last obelisk until Knight Captain Valeri is dead. The final obelisk is dropped just before the last boss. Upon exiting the first Awakened realm, you are faced with Arsonists and Strikers. The Arsonists apply the tank with a stacking magic debuff, Torch Strike. This can be dispelled and should be. The Strikers merely throw rocks at players with the highest threat. Although not too deadly, you need to keep an eye on them as they tend to run off and are notorious for pulling extra mobs. This large pull made inside the brig introduces 2 new mobs, Bile Rat Looters and Irontide Thugs. The Looters will frequently cast Dark Step. This buffs their haste by 50% and should be purged if seen. The Irontide Thugs are more deadly and cast an interruptible, debilitating shout. If this cast is successful, it will do a burst of magic damage, while all nearby mobs take 50% reduced damage. This significantly increases your time spent on trash. Kick this as the highest of priorities. Remember, all of these mobs are humanoids and have a tendency to run off when at low HP. This can be very frustrating while fighting with almost every affix, so be sure to maintain an eye on them and utilize your grips, stuns, slows, and snares if possible. As mentioned before, this area is where your party can receive buffs. You get these buffs by freeing caged prisoners. For the Horde, if you free the Orc, you will receive 10% agility strength. The Undead will provide plus 10 to stamina. The Tauren will provide you with wisdom, that's giving you health and mana back every 10 seconds. And the Blood Elf will provide you with plus 10% intellect. I recommend getting every buff you can before activating the 2nd Awakened Pylon. Take notice of how I'm positioned. I'm standing outside the line of sight of the mobs inside the cage. If you do not, it is highly likely that they will aggro to you and slow down your process even more. Be careful with yellow mobs in this dungeon. They do not give percent, but they do in fact burst, bolster, apply necrotic, and drop sanguine. The juice is definitely not worth the squeeze. This 2nd Awakened Pylon is one of the toughest encounters. It is a ridiculously small area that will be filled up very quickly. Do your best to down the Mind Flay tentacles as soon as possible, but be wary of your space and move accordingly. If you LOS the Mind Flays, they will spawn in better locations further down the route, so play safe and kite early if needed. Upon exiting, we are faced with another striker and a new foe, Bile Rat Sea Speakers. The most noteworthy ability during this pack is Watery Dome. If this cast gets off, every mob within range will receive a magic shield that reduces damage taken by 75% and applies an absorption shield. Above all else, interrupt this cast or be very quick with your purges. This next section can get hectic very quickly. Again, we have yellow mobs littered around, and I recommend dealing with as many of them as possible before the boss encounter, as to be sure you will not accidentally pull them later. This first pull will have an arsonist and 2 C speakers. If your group wants to take it slow, you can opt into only pulling one of the C speakers. This area also has prison cages that will eventually be opened by the boss during his encounter. However, if your group has the ability to do so, open them early. You will receive % if you kill the mob inside, but only if you open it before the boss opens it. I recommend doing this on teaming weeks as it's an easy way to get some % and does not require you to alter your route too much. Especially during a sanguine or a bursting week, this area requires hypervigilance as it's too easy to lose track of a mob that is running away, and you do not want to pull extra trash before your group is ready or drop sanguine in an inconvenient place. Do everything you can to control the mobs and your pulls. Now this block warden is getting beat up by the mobs around him, but if you do have to deal with him, make sure not to stand in his lockdown. It will probably one-shot you. As you can see, Watery Dome got off. We do our best to purge as soon as possible. As you can see here, abilities such as Twilight Devastation can and will go through prison cells and walls and cause mobs to aggro to you. Just be cautious of this. Jes Howlis can be a very simple fight if you can get everybody on the same page. During the first phase, Jes will cast Crippling Shiv, Howling Fear, and Flashing Daggers. Howling Fear is just that, kick it. Crippling Shiv is not interruptible, but can and should be dispelled ASAP, as it will slow its target, making it difficult to run away from Flashing Daggers. Flashing Daggers, you must LOS this ability or it will one-shot you. You can do so by tucking away behind the environment. Upon reaching 70%, Jes will stun your party and proceed down the catwalk to the other side, all while opening prisoner cages. As the tank, do your best to grab aggro and follow the boss. Once Jes is finished running and opening, he will begin to cast Motivating Cry. This is where the coordination kicks in. During this phase, you will also be facing Jes's brother, Bobby. Bobby will also be casting Howling Fear, but separate from Jes. This means that you have to deal with both of their interrupts at the same time, while dodging Flashing Daggers and dealing with Bobby's special ability, Vicious Mauling. While targeted by Vicious Mauling, the player is stunned and the party must damage Bobby until his shield, Blade Turning, falls off and Vicious Mauling becomes interruptible. Now we're up to 3 separate interrupts and a damage check and a one-shot mechanic that must be dodged. Although it seems like a lot, you can trivialize this fight by letting Jes continue to cast Motivating Cry. This of course only works if your group has the ability to purge, as each stack of Motivating Cry increases the boss's damage by 10% and reduces the damage he takes by 90%. By letting Jes continue to channel his ability, your group can solely focus on Bobby. This means only one fear needs to be kicked, and the Blade Turning buff will almost be instantly removed, meaning that the group can interrupt Vicious Mauling ASAP, reducing the amount of damage the targeted player endures. Once Bobby is dead or Jes is just about to be done channeling, interrupt Motivating Cry and purge his stacks. It will once again be phase 1, however much more manageable with Bobby out of the picture. Once Bobby is dead, start making your way up to the officer quarters. Ashfane jailers can be pesky, but easily countered. They will cast Riot Shield, and this shield will reduce all incoming damage by 75%, but also reflect all spells back to the caster. Use AoE crowd control effects to interrupt the shield. Ashfane officers too have access to Riot Shield, however they also cast Handcuff. This will pacify and silence its target, and should be interrupted immediately. Remember to kick those debilitating shouts from the Irontide thugs. It's good to note that Ashvane Marines will not melee, which means they are super annoying to fight with other mobs. Be sure to LOS them in order to stack them up. They will cast suppression fire on the tanks, and this cannot be moved out of. What I mean by that is the Marine will follow the tank's movements, so be sure you're not facing towards your party members. If you are hit with suppression fire, it will deal ticking damage and leave behind a magic debuff. I tried to LOS suppression fire here and it seemed to work, but don't quote me on it. Now for this next pull, I do not recommend pulling the entire room. I advise you to just pull the Flamecaster in LOS until she runs out of the room. I dipped in just a tad too far, and I ended up pulling the entire room, but luckily we were fairly good on interrupts and stuns. It also helped that we had meta and combustion up. Now when dealing with Flamecasters, they cast two abilities and both are very deadly. Blaze is their normal cast and should be interrupted or stunned if possible, but not if it means that a fuse lighter will go off. This ability deals massive amounts of fire damage. Tad bit embarrassing, but I did run out of blacksmithing keys here, but ideally you want to open this gate before entering the third obelisk. Instead, we simply take the long way around. Upon exiting, you will do a slight backtrack and your group should deal with the two Flamecasters and Ashvane Officer. This next part can be tricky without a rogue or a hunter, but if done right, it cuts down a significant time spent on trash. Ideally, you want to hop in the cannon and fire at the furthest pack. Once that pack is hit, it will start to charge the cannon. When it reaches the closer group, hit them again with another cannon shot. This will ensure that you get the maximum amount of hits from the cannon off. This is also the time you want to use your slows, your roots, your knockbacks of any kind to keep the enemy grouped as much as possible. Do note that without a Tricks of the Trade or misdirect to the tank, the person in the cannon will take massive amounts of damage, as they will hold all the aggro. As you can see, it's unlikely to kill all the adds, so be ready to snag aggro ASAP and deal with the remaining mobs. The first thing to note about Knight Captain Valeri is do not touch the barrels prematurely. Don't bring them outside, don't even move them from one side to the other before the fight starts, because this will cause you to have extra barrels and this will bite you in the end. Start the encounter and then, it's best if your healer can do it, but then move the barrels. It's tough to see this encounter in its entirety from the tank's point of view, but ideally you want to stack in one corner while your barrel runner moves all the barrels to the opposite corner. Throughout the fight, Valeri will cast Ignition. These are the small circles that appear on the ground, and after 15 seconds will explode. Do not stand in them, and be sure no barrels are within them either. Valeri will also cast Cinder Flame. This is when she turns to a randomly selected barrel and casts a large frontal fire cone. This will ignite all barrels and one-shot most players. It's because of this ability you want to have a player moving the barrels as far away as possible. Since it's unavoidable, when a barrel ignites, you'll want to ensure the radius of its blast will not hit your party members. The barrel radius is massive, but there should always be a safe spot if managed and done correctly. This boss is not a DPS check, and if that means you have to sacrifice more players to moving barrels, so be it. Better safe than sorry. It's worth noting, if you get fuse lighter on you, don't be the person that picks up a barrel or you will cause it to explode immediately. Once the boss is dead, backtrack once again and grab the last pylon. We will be taking this awakened mob all the way to the final boss's room, but be sure to drop it in a safe spot. You do not want to accidentally pull the boss or the wardens upon leaving this realm. If you are short on percent, when you leave the realm you can engage the 2 wardens at the top, just watch out for their lockdown ability and remember not to stand in it. Overseer Korgus can be a complicated encounter that is ultimately RNG based, but we will not get into that part. I will, however, point out the basics. Number 1, Korgus has 2 cycles that alter his abilities: Incendiary or Blast. During his Incendiary rounds, all mechanics will leave an 8-second dot on all players who take damage. During Blast, Korgus's mechanics knock players back. Number 2, ensure all players have a solid place to stand during the encounter. You want to minimize movement as it will increase your Heartstopper venom, causing you to be stunned for 8 seconds should it reach 100. Number 3, Korgus's explosive burst ability. This will deal splash damage to anyone around. Number 4, avoid cross ignition. Depending on your location, camera angles can make this difficult to see, but do your best to avoid it. Number 5, spread out soaks of Deadeye. If you take more than one without an immunity, you will perish. Players should also avoid Massive Blast. The cannons around the room periodically discharge a blast in front of them in a random direction. Be mindful of it. As an added bonus, if you have a skilled Demon Hunter in your party, they can negate the Deadeye mechanic entirely. As long as they have Blade Dance up, they can stand in front of every single one and not take damage. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or concerns or comments, be sure to leave them down below, or catch me live on Twitch. I stream Monday through Thursday starting at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hop in the chat, let's talk about tanking or Mythic Plus or whatever you want. I never know where the conversations are going to end up. But that's it for me, folks. Until next time, stay frosty.